did you soften the GOP platform on Ukraine?
I wasn't involved in that. Honestly, I was not involved. Yeah, I was not involved in that. I'd like to, I'd have to take a look at it, but I was not involved.
Do you know what they did?
They softened it, I heard, but I was not involved.
They took away the part of the platform calling for provision of lethal weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. Why is that a good idea?
Look, you know, I have my own ideas.
For months, the Trump campaign denied full stop that anybody associated with their campaign had any ties to Russia or any contacts with Russia, full stop. One of the revelations of the last few days is that a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, one of 5 people he named as his foreign policy advisors during the campaign, not only traveled to Moscow last summer in July, we now know that he got authorization from the Trump campaign at the time to take that trip to Moscow. That trip was in July of last year. It was just before the Republican convention. A week later, Trump officials at the Republican convention pushed the Republican Party platform on one issue and one issue only. They wanted language about Russia significantly softened in the Republican Party platform. There had been a proposed plank for the platform that said the Republican Party believed the United States should support Ukraine in any way that we could, up to and including providing them weapons so they could fight off Russian incursions into Ukraine. That was the proposed plank in the Republican Party platform. The Trump folks didn't care about anything else. They fought really for nothing else in the platform, but they fought that. They fought to change that to a softer, more pro-Russian stance. And this is worrying in part because this is what was described in that British dossier, right, of alleged Russian dirt on Donald Trump. This dynamic was described as part of what Russia wanted as a quid pro quo for its intervention on Trump's behalf in the presidential election. I mean, part of what the dossier says is this, quote, the operation, meaning the effort to influence our election, that has been conducted with the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. In return, the Trump team has agreed to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue. We definitely do have evidence that the Trump campaign was working to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue. And we have belated evidence of that, but we've now got it. After Mr. Trump and his campaign manager both initially denied having anything to do with the platform change, a Trump campaign official now admits that the campaign pushed to soften the Russian language in the platform. Says it was done specifically at Trump's request. The other piece of it we learned last night in Politico is that a Russian citizen who worked for the Trump campaign manager in Ukraine, worked for Paul Manafort when Manafort was working in Ukraine, that Russian citizen visited the United States around the time of the Republican convention. He later claimed to have been responsible for getting the Trump campaign to get that Russia language softened in the Republican Party platform. Well, Politico reports that this Russian citizen, his name is Konstantin Kilimnik. Politico reports that he's now under scrutiny by U.S. authorities, including the FBI. So, again, there's 2 things that we're tracking here, right? The first one is direct links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign while the Russian attack on our election was underway. And to that point, there is a second beat on this story that you need to know. In terms of this, softening the Russian language in the Republican platform. There's a second beat on this you should know. Back in August, there was some additional reporting on this particular Russian guy who used to work with Paul Manafort, used to work with Trump's campaign manager in Ukraine. We now know he traveled to the U.S. ahead of the Republican convention. He may have been involved. He says he was involved in making the Republican Party's platform more pro-Russia. Well, that guy, that Russian guy, back in August, when there was a lot of attention to Paul Manafort, to Trump having a campaign manager with tons of Russian ties and lots of experience working in that part of the world. At that time, in August of last year, Politico profiled this Russian guy, who was Paul Manafort's right-hand man in his previous work in Ukraine. And one of the things they turned up about this Russian guy is that he very proudly admitted that he was Russian intelligence. He at one point had a job working at the International Republican Institute, their office in Moscow. When he applied for that job, he apparently told the IRI that he learned his language skills, that he built up his resume in the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence. Quoting from Politico, one of their sources, it was like, oh yeah, Kostya, the guy from the GRU. That's how we talked about him. Quote, the Institute was informed that he was GRU. But it didn't matter at the time because they weren't doing anything sensitive. They knew he was Russian military intelligence, but that was okay. You know, it was a Moscow office. They weren't doing anything sensitive at the time, so it's okay that he was Russian military intelligence. But then he turns up in a U.S. presidential campaign at the Republican National Convention, changing the Republican Party's platform on Russia to make it more pro-Putin. And he's a GRU guy? He's a Russian military intelligence guy? This guy, again, this is being reported by Politico tonight, this guy who is reportedly being looked into by the FBI, he came to the United States last year to meet with Paul Manafort very shortly after Manafort was given a senior position in the Trump campaign. He came last spring during the height of the Republican presidential primary. Then, this same guy, now apparently being looked into by the FBI, this same guy reportedly came back to the United States again to meet with Paul Manafort in the late summer, right around the time of the Republican National Convention. But what was way more interesting than that, what was riveting and bizarre to watch at the time, that we couldn't make heads or tails of at the time, was the Trump campaign's one exception on the party platform. Even though they let all this other stuff slide, that was very much not in keeping with Trump and the campaign, they did decide to get up on their hind legs and fight and intercede aggressively for one specific thing in the platform, one specific part of the Republican Party platform, and that was a thing about Russia. There was a proposed plank for the Republican Party platform that said Ukraine should get help from the United States, up to and including lethal weaponry, so Ukraine could fight off Russian incursions. And you know what? The Trump campaign let everything else in the platform slide, even stuff that might theoretically have bothered them. But that Ukraine and Russia thing, they jumped right up on that. And they insisted that that plank only, that one had to be taken out. That language could not stand. And it was weird at the time. And yes, there was a lot else going on in presidential politics. It was the conventions, right? But even then, you know, as the Russia-Trump questions continued to percolate and ultimately got more acute over time, ultimately, Trump, the candidate, did have to answer for what his campaign did with the platform at his convention.
Why did you soften the GOP platform on Ukraine?
I wasn't involved in that. Honestly, I was not involved. Yeah, I was not involved in that. I'd like to, I'd have to take a look at it, but I was not involved.
Do you know what they did?
They softened it, I heard, but I was not involved.
I was not involved. In addition to the candidate himself denying having anything to do with it, his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had done all that work in Ukraine, he also denied having anything to do with it.
There's been some controversy about something in the Republican Party platform that essentially changed the Republican Party's views when it comes to Ukraine. How much influence did you have on changing that language, sir?
I had none. In fact, I didn't even hear of it until after our convention was over.
Where did it come from then? Because everybody on the platform committee had said it came from the Trump campaign. If not you, who?
No, it absolutely did not come from the Trump campaign. I don't know who everybody is, but I guarantee you,
so
there's
nobody from the
Trump
campaign wanted that change in the platform?
No one. Zero.
So, after the Republican convention, the candidate himself denies having anything to do with it. His campaign manager, Paul Manafort, denies having anything to do with it, denies that neither he nor anyone from the Trump campaign had anything to do with it. How did it happen? Dunno, must have been fairies. Well, now that bizarre non-explanation, those denials have fallen apart, because now a former Trump campaign official has fessed up about it. He's a former Trump campaign official named J.D. Gordon, and he says, as a Trump campaign official at the time, taking orders from the Trump campaign at the time, he's the one who did it. He says now that he was the one who interceded in the Republican Party platform to get this language that would keep Russia happy. And he says he did it specifically at Donald Trump's request.
Gordon says that he was a part of the effort that was pushed by the Trump campaign to put some language in the GOP platform that essentially said that the Republican Party did not advocate for arming the Ukrainians in their battle against those pro-Russian separatists. Of course, that was a big issue that was flaring up at the time of the Republican convention. That effort was ultimately successful. They were successful in having that language in the Republican Party platform. And I asked J.D. Gordon, well, why is that? Why did you go ahead and advocate for that language? And he said that this is the language that Donald Trump himself wanted and advocated for.
Okay, so this is just one thing that happened on the Trump campaign. It was really weird at the time. We got all these denials about it that seemed very implausible about it for months. Now it's all falling apart. Why now? Why is this falling apart now? Why are people from the Trump campaign now admitting that, yeah, they did change that plank in the Republican Party platform to make it nicer to Russia? Why are they admitting it now after denying it for months? I don't know. But tonight, as I said, this breaking news, Politico is reporting that the FBI is onto this now, too, because this Russian citizen who worked with Paul Manafort reportedly visited Paul Manafort while he was running the Trump campaign at the time. And he reportedly later told people that what he came to the United States for late last summer, around the time of the Republican convention, was to get that language changed in the Republican Party platform on the issue of Russia. Go back for a second to that Republican convention last summer. Remember that platform fight over the softening the Russia language, right, and the Ukraine plank. That happened about a week after one of Trump's foreign policy advisors took that campaign-authorized trip to Moscow. Well, about a week after that platform fight, the day after the Republican convention ended, there was another political bomb that was dropped on the U.S. presidential election from Russia. The day after the Republican convention ended, right before the Democratic convention began, we got what U.S. intelligence agencies believe to be the next big Russian incursion into our election. We got the first WikiLeaks dump. We got the first WikiLeaks publication of documents hacked and stolen by Russian government sources from the DNC, from the Democratic Party. And they started publishing those stolen documents from the DNC right before the Democrats started their convention. What was particularly impressive by the Trump campaign at the time is how they were so organized around all the WikiLeaks stuff. They were really able to jump right on those WikiLeaks releases and instantly dovetail their own message with the curated point of the WikiLeaks dump, which was to highlight and deepen and aggravate the rift between the Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders wings of the Democratic Party. The Trump campaign turned on a dime instantly as soon as those WikiLeaks dumps started. That was their new message. They were right on it. And then by the end of that month, by the end of August, what was weird on the Trump side was that people close to Trump were apparently in the know on what was going to come next from WikiLeaks, on what the next batch of Russian hacked documents was going to be. This was from an informal campaign advisor to Donald Trump, a longtime associate of Donald Trump. See the date on that, August 21st? Eerily, uncannily in the know. Trust me, it'll soon be Podesta's time. Eerily, uncannily in the know that John Podesta would be next somehow. Trust me. Well then, a few weeks later, October 7th, indeed, WikiLeaks released its whole new dump. A whole new bunch of emails and documents, this time from Clinton campaign chief John Podesta. Emails that U.S. intelligence say were hacked by Russia.